Hi everyone, my name is Cornelius and welcome to this video. In this video, we will be talking about data types in JavaScript. So once again, we go up here and create a new file, and this one will name it datatypes.js. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. If you are new, you're highly welcome. The subs to the channel will really be appreciated. So, as programmers, one of the simplest way to describe or summarize what we do is that we manipulate data, right? So, even though JavaScript, unlike languages like C++ and others, does not require you to explicitly state what type of value you want to assign to a variable. However, during execution, the JavaScript compiler does that for you. So in JavaScript, there are basically two types of data. In JavaScript, two types of data types. So the first one is primitive, which is what we'll be talking about in this video. And the second one is non-primitives, or also you can call it reference types. Now, primitive data types are data types built directly into the programming language and represent the lowest level of manipulating data in JavaScript. So, primitives don't have any property or method available to them. And this is a major factor when it comes to differentiating between primitives and non-primitive data type. So in the future, we will learn about methods, but for now, just know that primitives don't have methods available to them. Now, primitives are immutable, and in programming, when we say something is immutable, it means it can't be changed. Now, remember, when we declare variables using var and let, those variables declared using var and let can be reassigned, so they are mutable, meaning they can be changed. But the immutability we are talking about in this context applies to primitive itself, not the variable. So non-primitive, like I said, they are called reference values or simply objects. You understand? In fact, don't think about it in a complex way. In JavaScript, if it is not a primitive, it is an object. Don't think about it in a complicated manner. So in this video, like I said, we will focus on primitive data types. And in JavaScript, we have 7 different primitive data types. And these are, I'll be using what we call comments to mention them. So the first one, we have number. So comment allows you to write code or a little bit of information about your code. So what happens is that the JavaScript compiler ignores it. Okay, it does not execute your comments, so it jumps it. Now the second one is null. The third one is undefined. And the fourth one is Boolean. And the fifth one, we have strings. Then symbols. And then we have the last one called big int. So we are going to start from top to bottom, and the first one we'll be talking about is numbers. So as the name implies, the number data type is what we use to represent numerical values. You understand? We use it to represent data that is a number, either a whole number or numbers with decimal points. So in some programming languages, you have to specifically say it if it is a whole number or it has a decimal points, and they call them floats. But in JavaScript, numbers is used to define all of them. So there's also a keyword called type of, which allows us to know what is the data type of the value in our variable, be the function or whatsoever. So we are going to be using the type of keywords to establish the type of value we are using. So now let's get our first example here and say let age equals 24, right? So now we'll do console.log age, right? So we also go ahead and do console.log type of age. So what do we expect to see? Let's run our code, and for once let's see how it goes. And when we run the code, first of all we'll see 24, and then the type of age will be number. Now let's go ahead and write node, and for those that want to run their code in the browser, you can simply go to your index.html and put your datatypes.js in the script. So we do node datatypes, and there you have it, 24 number. So the value is 24, and the type of the value, the data type of the value that the variable age is holding is a number. Now let's move on to the next one, and the next one is null. Now null is a little bit weird and kind of tricky to explain. So what null is that null is a data type that points to an empty address in the computer memory, or we could say it holds a non-existent or an empty object. So if we go ahead and use the type of operator like we used on age, it will actually return something called an object. Let's go ahead and do something like this. Let's say let empty equals null, right? So let's go ahead once again, console.log empty. So you can just do Ctrl+D to get a copy of it below. So we do type of empty. So what do we expect when we run the code? Let's go ahead and do it. Oh, sorry, we did not save it. Let's go up and do Ctrl+S. Save your code, then come back here and do. So you see we get null and object. So that object is kind of tricky to explain. So even though null returns type of object, it is still primitive. Okay, in fact, according to the MDN documentation of JavaScript, a null returning type of object is a bug, and fixing it will actually cause some errors or some parts of JavaScript to break. So it is just left as it is. But remember, null is not an object, it is a primitive. It simply returns an object because null points to an empty object in the computer memory. That's just the best way to look at it. So the third data type we are going to talk about is Boolean. Now it's safe to say that Boolean is the most straightforward data type in JavaScript, because Boolean is the data type that holds the value of either true or false, nothing more, nothing less. So it's kind of the way of saying yes or no in programming. So now let's go ahead and do something like this. Let's say let A equals 3. Let B equals 5. So we do console.log A less than B. So when we save and run the code, we'll see true, because A obviously is less than B. The value A is holding 3 is less than the value B is holding 5. So saying A less than B is just similar to saying 3 less than 5. So if we go ahead and use the greater than symbol and we do A greater than B, we'll expect to see false, because 3 is not greater than 5. So let's run the code again. Let's save. I always forget to save. So let's run the code and see. So we expect to see false, because A is not greater than 5. A is not greater than B. That means 3 is not greater than 5. Right? Now, there is a Boolean that is an object, and it should not be confused with the primitive Boolean we are talking about in this video. I'll talk about Boolean as an object in other videos later in the future, but right now we are talking about the primitive Boolean. So the next data type we'll be talking about is undefined. Now, undefined is the value that JavaScript gives to variables. Undefined is the value that JavaScript gives to variables that are declared but not yet initialized by you, the programmer. So let's go ahead and do something like this. Let's say let's name, and that's it. And we'll go ahead and do console.log console.log name. Right, so we'll go ahead now and do console.log again, type of name. So what will we expect to see? When we declare name, we did not initialize it. That means we did not set name equals to anything, right? But having declared it, it has been placed in the computer memory by JavaScript. So what happens is JavaScript gives it a value that acts like a default value. Okay, and that value is undefined. So since we did not assign a value to the variable before we use it by console, when we use console.log up here in line 22, so that allows JavaScript to output undefined. So let's go ahead and see how it works, then I'll explain it in detail. So what happens is that when we declare a variable, it gets placed in the computer memory. And even if we assign the variable to a value, what happens is that JavaScript initially sets the variable equal to a value called undefined. Undefined acts like a default value that JavaScript gives the variable. So after giving the variable the undefined value, when we run it and our code is executing, the value that you as a programmer gives to the variable gets executed in the last minute. But if it happens that you declare a variable without assigning it to any value, JavaScript automatically outputs the value of undefined for the variable. So what happens is JavaScript is not telling you that you did not define the variable. What JavaScript is giving you is a value that JavaScript itself has given to the variable that you declare, even though you do not reassign it. Now, it is only JavaScript that has the power to assign undefined to a variable. If you go ahead and set a variable to the value of undefined, that is not the same as JavaScript telling you it is undefined. In fact, if you go ahead and declare a variable as undefined, as far as JavaScript is concerned, you've given it a value, right? So we are going ahead to the next data type, and that is strings. So string is more fun to use, and we use strings to represent text data in our code. It is wrapped in either a single quote or double quotes. So earlier I mentioned how primitives do not have properties or methods available to them, but string on the other hand has some methods available to it, and I'll give you an example. So let's see how it works here. We do okay, let's take our name and use the name up here, right? Let's do name equals Cornelius, right? So what do we do now? Let me come here and show you a method that we can use on strings. So we do console.log name. Name is deprecated. Okay, let's change it to something like this. My name. I will do the same up here. So all we get now is, when we do let my name equals Cornelius, we'll get the output of the name. Then we'll get type of string. So we come ahead now and do console.log my name dot. When we use dot, we see so many methods available to us. But the one I'm going to use is, it will change the name to uppercase. All the letters in the name will change to uppercase. So we'll do dot to uppercase. Let's change to uppercase. And there you have it. So let's go ahead and run our code. Make sure you save it. Oh, sorry, uppercase is a method, so we have to invoke it. Now go ahead, save, come down here and run your code once again. So you see, we get Cornelius, we get string, type of name, my name is string, and then we go down and do my name dot to uppercase, and we get Cornelius. So now what we did here by calling a method is that we were able to use a method on the string even though it is primitive, and this is because the JavaScript compiler wraps the string in something called a wrapper, and that wrapper allows it to act like an object and receive methods. Remember, it acts like an object. It is not an object. It is still a primitive. It just acts like it. So the last one we're going to talk about big int. So symbol is quite tricky at this point, and I believe it's beyond the scope of this video. So I'll create a separate video on symbols later in the future where we can learn about everything, and I'll use a lot of examples so you can easily grasp it. Now big int, why we use big int in programming, in JavaScript programming, is because there are certain limitations to the usage of numbers, right? There are some very, very big numbers that is beyond what we can manipulate using just numbers that we talked about earlier. And that is where big int comes in. So every operator we can use on numbers can also be used on big int. Things like addition, multiplication, subtraction, all these operators, increments and all that can be used on big int. But when we try to use the division operator, we will notice a difference, right? So like when you try to divide a number, the result was supposed to come with a decimal point. Let's go ahead and do something like this. Now we do let my big int equals 7. So when you declare big int, you add an n notation at the end, and that lets JavaScript know that you are using it. The value is a big int, not just a number. So when we go ahead and do okay, let's go ahead and do something like this. All right, so let's go ahead and console.log my big int and we also go ahead and check the type using console.log once again and doing type of my big int. So when we go ahead and run the code, what do we see? So you see we get 3n. Normally we are supposed to get 3.5n. Let's do something like that with numbers, right? Let's remove the n from it and see what happens. So when we remove the n and convert it to numbers, your normal numbers, we'll get 3.5, right? We'll get 3.5. But when we go ahead and run it now, let's see. We get 3.5 because it's a number. But going up here again and adding what's it called, n to it, which makes it become a big int automatically. Running it, we'll see that we do not get a decimal point. What we just get is 3n. So even though big ints and numbers hold numerical values, you also need to remember something, that a big int value is only loosely equal to a number value, not strictly equal to it. So what do I mean by loosely equal to? In JavaScript, there are two types of equality operators. We have the double equals and the triple equals sign. Now, how they work is that the double equals sign compares values. It compares values, while the triple equals sign compares both the value and the data type. So if we go ahead and do something like this and say if what should I do? Okay, if 5n, let's use double equals first, equals 5. So what should happen? We should see console.log console.log. This will work. This will work. And when we go to the else statement, we'll see, we'll do something like this. Console.log. What should I write here? Okay, this will not work. So let's save the code, go down here and run it. So what do we have? We see this will work. Oh, I wrote the will wrongly. Let's save and run it again one more time. We see this will work because we use double equals. So it simply compares the value, not the type. So what happens here is this double equals allows JavaScript to compare only the 5, neglecting the n, which makes the first one a big int. Now if we go ahead and add another equal sign, making it triple equal sign, let's save and see what happens. We will expect to see this will not work because this time around JavaScript will try to compare both the values, which is 5, and then the data type, taking the n into account. So 5n is a big int, 5 is a number, so they are not equals. Now we'll see something like this will not work. Now let's go ahead and run our code. This will not work because there are two different types. So I will make a separate video, like I said, about symbols in JavaScript, and also I think I'll still make another video where I dive deeper into big ints. And in the next video we are going to be talking about operators and expressions in JavaScript. I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember that you can rewatch it anytime you like. Come back to the video. That is why I'm creating a different file for each concept we are talking about. Come back, rewatch it, and make sure you get your hand dirty with it. Mess around with the code. Look at things you can do with it. You can go back to the strings and try to use different methods with it. Okay, there are so many resources online that you can use. You can go to places like MDN, W3 Schools. Those are all dope websites where you can learn more about JavaScript. And please make sure to like and subscribe. It means a lot to me. And turn on your notifications so that every time I upload a new video, you get to know and you can come and watch. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.